Hey everybody, welcome to another WOFOYO short. This is C-Dub. In our last full episode, Bones and I were talking about the weightier matters of the law. Jesus says you focused on basically the minutia, but you've neglected the weightier matters of the law, and he named three things. He named justice, mercy, and faith. And we also discussed in that how justice and mercy, if you were to look at it philosophically, they're kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. And we actually have in Christianity, we have those that will gravitate toward justice or judgment, legalism at times, but it's hellfire and brimstone all the time, all the time, all the time, and never any grace. And then there's also times where it's mercy and compassion, mercy, compassion, mercy, and compassion. And the next thing you know, you got drag queens up in your church trying to convert your kids. That's out of balance. What happens to be in there in the middle is faith. And faith keeps you from going too far to the right and too far to the left. And also, we had mentioned in one of our first episodes in our first season that faith by another name is simply trusting God. There's people that have a whole doctrine, a whole industry, if you will, on preaching about faith. And there's some value in what they're saying. There's also some overboard. So I just want to talk about, can too much of a good thing be evil in this? And if you look up in the Hebrew, which is ironically the same word that the Egyptians use for their sun god, the Hebrew word for evil is Ra. And what it meant, it could mean generically, it could mean evil, go figure. But also more specifically, it could be translated as harm. So what makes something evil? Of course, there's intent, but harm. Is it harmful? If something's harmful to you, one of the best passages that I remember was when Joseph is confronting his brothers about how they sold him into slavery. He said, "You meant it for evil. You meant it to harm me, but God meant it for good." Also, we had an episode or two where we were talking about the days of rebuilding, where we talked about Nehemiah and we talked about Ezra, and especially with Nehemiah, he said that there was somebody that tried to entice him to go into the inner chamber. Basically said, I know he meant me evil. In other translations, I know he meant me harm. So how do you know what's evil? Well, it's harmful. We have to keep that in balance because harmful does not mean unpleasant. Okay, those are two opposite things. So if you have too much judgment, even under the auspices of justice, we're calling it justice. Well, it gets into vengeance. That's harmful. True justice is not harmful. Compassion, mercy, is that harmful? Lord, no, it's great. Too much of it to where there's never any boundaries set, to where everybody can get away with everything, even when it's at the expense of justice. If we have so much justice and judgment that it's at the expense of compassion and common sense, are those harmful? You bet you it can be harmful. So you can technically, by saying that, you can be so compassionate that you're evil. You can be so justice, justice, judgment that it becomes evil. And as we said before, faith is that middle ground. Faith is what keeps you in line. It keeps you from going to the right hand or to the left too far. It's what keeps you on the straight and narrow path that Jesus talks about. So, another aspect of this, what's harmful versus what benefits? Think in terms of short term and long term. We talk about sacrifice. And here in America, especially in certain circles, we like to talk about sacrifice, and a lot of what we're defining as sacrifice isn't even really sacrifice. On the other hand, if you think of it in these terms, sacrifice is something that you're doing all the time, whether you are conscious of it or not. When it comes to short term pleasure versus long term reward, or vice versa, it is a form of sacrifice. If you look at the Bible characters of old, those that were wise were those that sacrificed in the short term. No different than doing PT in the morning. If you're willing to sacrifice, if you're willing to endure some short term pain, then you have long term results. If you're willing to endure some short term fatigue, then you will have long term results of a better life overall. Now, if you're going to sacrifice the long term for the short term, that's harmful. You're putting off rewards for the sake of immediate pleasure. That becomes harmful. I've seen it with family members. I've seen it in myself. This is something that I have to confront daily with every decision that I make. Short term versus long term. One of those things about, is it evil? Am I doing myself harm? If I forego prayer, if I forego relationship with God, even for church activities, if I forego these weightier matters, these important things, kind of like Jesus talking with Mary and Martha. Martha wants to do all these activities. Mary sits at Jesus' feet. Mary builds the relationship more than Martha does. They both love Jesus. But he says one's more beneficial. So if I neglect to do things in the morning, if I neglect to work out or punish my body a little bit where it's going to hurt, then eventually that is going to be harmful to my body. If I get distracted, if I don't build a relationship with God, and I focus on the short term pleasure of entertainment, then there's going to be a long term expense. Therefore, you can be so entertained that it's evil, even if you're watching Christian TV. Because getting entertained is not building a relationship. Entertainment is entertainment. If you're getting entertained in your church, it's getting entertained in a different location. So ask yourself this: is it short term pleasure? Is that all I'm living for? Because if that is your highest operating goal, then it's going to lead you to ruin, and therefore it's evil. If it's going to be a long term blessing, even though there's short term and immediate discomfort, it's not evil. It's a blessing. It might be a blessing in disguise, but it's a blessing. So I just want you to think about that. You're always sacrificing something. You're always sacrificing either the future for the immediate, or you can sacrifice the immediate for the future. It's something you're already doing. But pray, get in the Word for yourself, and ask the Holy Spirit which one you're doing, and to bring it to mind when you're getting ready to make a bad decision. And by all means, that trust and that faith, maintain that relationship so your faith is established, and it'll keep you from going too far to the right or too far to the left, which is evil. WOFOYO.